in the first two chapters of the paper, we've talked about who we want to recruit and how we're going to select them. As we have said earlier, getting the right people working in the organisation is going to be one of the critical things for their success. So it's very important that we get the right people working for us. So the stage we've got to is we've selected people and they are now about to join the organisation. What we're going to move on and talk about is something that might be very close to the things that you guys are particularly interested in, because we're now going to start talking about training and development. Training and development, however you look at it, is basically a cost for the organisation. So what an organisation has to do is to make sure that its training and its development is cost effective and is also adding to what the organisation is able to achieve. So if, for example, I own a company and I spend $500,000 on training all my staff, that is simply a cost unless the benefits to the organisation are going to be bigger than $500,000. Maybe they'll be able to keep customers happy. Maybe they will be able to come up with new ideas. Maybe they'll be able to work faster. But training and development is one of the biggest costs that organisations face, so they have to make sure they are spending the money wisely. Why is it particularly important? As an accountant, one of the reasons why training and development is so important to you is because it's a very easy cost to work out how much we're spending, but it's very difficult to work out the monetary value of the benefit that we're getting. So it's easy to see how much we're spending, difficult to work out how much it's benefiting the entire organisation. And yet, if we don't work out what the benefits are, then potentially we could easily cut the spending on training. It's one of these things where if a company has problems with its finances, often training and development is one of the early costs that a company looks to cut back on. Again, because it's easy to see the cost saving, it's not so easy to see what the benefit was going to be. So it's important in Chapter 3 that we think about the training and development. We'll be thinking about it from 2 points of view. The one that potentially is of more interest to you at the moment is what's the effect on the person who is getting trained. Most of you who are working for organisations, you are being trained by them. So what's the benefit to you? But the other way to think about training and development, to think about Chapter 3, is when you are a manager, when you are in charge of other people, what will you need to train them to do? How will you train them in the skills that they need? So training development is something that you will see throughout your working life, either being the person who's receiving the training or later on being the person who has to decide what the training is going to be for everybody else. So, first of all, let's start by just making sure that we're clear with the difference between training and development. If you remember in the introduction, I talked about the fact that there is technical language that we use in paper F1. We saw that when we talked about recruitment and selection. To most people, recruitment and selection would be the same thing. If I talk to most people about recruitment, they think that includes not only deciding on what kind of candidate we want, but also choosing the right person. Back in Chapter 1, we said that those were two different things. One is recruitment, and a separate one is selection. Same thing here. If you talk to most people about training and development, they will say it's the same thing. And it's not. The differences are fairly minor. For our purposes, most of the things that we say about training will also be true of development, but technically they are slightly different things. So training is basically something that you need to give somebody to carry out their present job. So you would train a worker, how do they operate a new computer system? If you've changed the computer system in work, You would train a worker, this is how we want you to carry out these particular tasks when they first join a department. So training is basically, you can't do your job without having gone through this. So it's carrying out their present job, it's often technical, and you can see it's usually given by a superior. It might well be one person sitting down with a junior member of staff and saying, this is a task that I've given you, this is how you do it. Now, as an example of that, when I became an accountant, I trained with one of the big 4 accountancy firms. I trained as an auditor. And so pretty much the very first thing that we did after we had joined the company was we spent 2 weeks on a course learning how to do double entry bookkeeping. So we spent 2 weeks intensive doing what you do in paper F3. And then we were back in the office probably for no more than 2 or 3 days, and we got sent on another course that actually told us how to start doing the work that we had to do out at clients. How do you prepare an audit paper? Why do you do things in a particular way? Now, both of those are examples of training. You needed them to be able to actually do the job. So one of the things that I did as a very early recruit was I had to start looking at auditing things like the cash that an organisation had. So I had to be told, the firm that I worked for, what was their approach to auditing the cash? What kind of tests did they do? What kind of way did the things have to be written up? So how were the tests performed? How were the tests recorded? How was everything checked? How were all the bits and pieces of paper filled out? Training, technical. It wouldn't have meant any course on bookkeeping, so I actually knew what I was looking for. There are other kinds of training that we went through. Basic things like, how do you fill out a timesheet? Basic things like, how do you fill out an expense form? These are also still training because they're immediate things that you need to do just to get going working for the organisation. So all of us working for companies have been through training courses because in effect the training courses, if you don't receive this training, you cannot actually do your job. Now, what kinds of circumstances do you need training? When you are new to an organisation. So it could well be it's your first ever job and so you're just new to working. You need to be trained how to carry out basic tasks. It could be, how are things done in this particular organisation? So I trained with one of the big 4 accountancy firms. If I had moved after a year or 2 to another of the big firms, they would have done things in a slightly different way, and I would have needed to have been trained in how that particular organisation did them. The other time that you need training is where something changes, and in that particular situation, everybody in the organisation will need training. So, for example, the big accountancy firm, if it decided to put in a new computer system, everybody, regardless of if they'd just started or if they'd been there for 20 years, everybody would have needed to go through the training again because without it they wouldn't have been able to do their jobs. So there are some kinds of training that you receive because you're new to a job or because you're new to a particular company. There are other kinds of training you receive when an organisation decides to change something. And finally, there might be kinds of training that you are forced to have. The obvious one, if you are an accountant, would be looking at something like, what happens when there is a new accounting standard that's brought in? All auditors need to know what it is so that they can check that accounts have been prepared in the right way. What happens when the tax rules change? All accountants who prepare tax for a company or for people need to know what the new rules are so that they prepare the tax returns in the correct way. So some training is forced on you. The key thing behind all training is it's immediate. You need this to be able to do your job today. Now, training, I said earlier, training is a cost. At least as far as training costs are concerned, most managers can understand them because they appreciate that without these training costs, the work cannot get done. If I don't know how to do my job, then I cannot obviously do it. So training is worth spending the money on. The bit where we run into difficulties is what's called development. Because development, you are giving somebody skills that they may use in the future. Notice that word there, that they may use. Now, development is also very, very important for reasons that we will see in a little while. But the key problem as an accountant is you are spending money today on something that the person who is receiving the development may never actually use. Again, when I was working at this Big Four accounting firm, I remember going on a week-long course about how to negotiate with clients. I had just finished my final exams and I'd got the results, so I was qualified. The idea that my company were thinking was that in a year or two I would be a manager. I would then have to go out and negotiate with clients for things like fees. So they sent me on a week-long course, which was very, very enjoyable, except for the fact that I then handed my notice in about 2 weeks later, and I left the firm, and I have never, ever put those skills into use. So I got paid to do a week's course in something that I still haven't used 20 years later. So, to be honest, that one was a waste of money. So the big problem with development is it's something that may be used in the future. So it may be very helpful, or it may be a complete waste of money. It says it's often concerned with soft skills. Soft skills are the ones that relate to things like dealing with people. Not technical skills. Technical skills, how do you do a tax return? How do you apply International Accounting Standard 13? I don't even know if there is an International Accounting Standard 13. But technical skills, how do you do something? Soft skills, much more to do with people. So again, it's difficult to work out what the benefits of those things are. And finally, it says their development is the responsibility of everyone in the organisation. So it could be a work colleague who tells me how to do something that will improve my performance. It could be my boss. It could be somebody in another part of the organisation who shows me a trick to doing something that will make my life a little bit easier, that will make things go a little bit faster. So training tends to be your boss. I've given you a task, let me show you how to carry it out. Development, on the other hand, could be anybody inside the organisation. Now, it's very important just to realise at this point that although I've talked about training costs, development costs, I don't necessarily mean the cost of sending somebody on a course. That's what most people would talk about with a training cost. Because we are studying, we think about the cost of doing a course, whether it's going to a college, whether it's watching something that's a video presentation. There is a cost to it because you've got to buy something and pay for it. Now, there are a lot of training costs in an organisation that are like that. You send somebody on a course. You get an outside lecturer to come in and give a talk about something. But even things inside the organisation still have a cost. If my boss sits down with me and spends an hour training me how to carry out a particular task, there is still a cost, because that is 1 hour of my manager's time that they cannot spend doing something else. So there is a cost even if you're doing this as part of the workplace. So training and development, very, very important. So we have to make sure we spend the money wisely. So we've got, first of all, various benefits behind both training and development. First of all, let's think about how training benefits the entire organisation. So how it benefits the company that are paying for the training. Well, the most obvious one is staff will have more skills. You may have come across the idea of people being multi-skilled. What does that mean? It means that a person can do more than one job. Why does that help an organisation? If the person who regularly does the job is away sick or absent for whatever reason, somebody else can step in and do the job and the organisation can carry on. So giving people lots of skills means that they can cover for each other. It would also, of course, mean that if the organisation was to get particularly busy in one particular area, they'd be able to have more people who could be able to do the work that was necessary. A good example would be something like an accountancy firm preparing individuals' tax returns, not company ones, but individuals' ones. Now, obviously, it's different in every country, but in the UK, tax specialists tend to get very busy in December and January, because the end of January is the last date when people can file a tax return, which may well mean that the work of the tax department is perhaps relatively quiet for most of the year, and then come January, it suddenly goes up. Now, how can you cope with that extra rise in demand? One way is to have all your tax specialists working lots of overtime, but of course all that will happen is they will get tired. So another possibility would be if you had people who could come in and do tax returns. They were skilled enough, maybe not to do all of it, but to do the basic things. Get them to do the basic stuff, and that way you ease the workload of everybody. When the tax return season is over in February and March, then all those people return to what they normally do. So multi-skilling avoids the problem of people being ill, and it also can try and smooth out the work. If it is going to go up, you get more people to do the work and to help out. And then when the work slows down, those people can return to their other tasks. So that might benefit an organisation. You've also got the fact that if people are trained, they can have more work delegated to them. So delegation is something we'll see later on in the course. But if I am a boss, I have two choices. Either I do the work myself or I get you to do it. If I train you, I will be able to get you to do more of the work, hopefully freeing my time up so that I can get on and do other things instead. So I can train you up so you can have more work, more interesting work delegated to you. The third, which is sort of similar, less supervision. If I tell you how to do something, I might have to stand over you and watch you doing it to make sure you don't make any mistakes. That obviously means there is nothing else that I can do with my time. So if I train you properly, you can get on and do the things on your own. Again, I can go off and do something more useful. Work should be a better quality. Hopefully, if I've trained you, the work will be better quality, which hopefully means that we will save money. We will save money because customers won't return things to us that are faulty. We will also save money because we won't have to fix as many items. So you might spend money on training and save it back again because you don't have to spend as much time repairing things that are broken. And finally in here, customer service should be improved. If you train staff to be more knowledgeable about the company, then they will be able to deal with more inquiries that customers have. All of us, no doubt, have been in a situation where you speak to somebody in the company and say, please tell me about this, please tell me why this is happening, please give me some information. And the person you're speaking to basically says, I will have to go and ask somebody because I don't know about that. Now, if that happens once or twice, you might not be too annoyed about it. But if that happens 6 or 7 times, the person you speak to has to keep going and finding out, then you would not be very impressed with the company. So customer service can be improved because the person you are speaking to knows more about how the company works. So training is a cost, but it can give us a benefit because we can look after our customers better. Now, those are all benefits for the company. But there are also, of course, benefits for the person who is receiving the training, benefits for the individual. You can see that the work should be more interesting. If I have been trained, I usually will be able to get more variety of work, and I also will probably get slightly harder, more involving, more interesting tasks to do. So instead of just doing very boring stuff all the time, I can be given more interesting things to do. That in itself is a big benefit to the individual. Underneath that, higher self-esteem. If my manager thinks that I am good enough to receive some training so that I can do my job even better, or if my manager thinks that I'm good enough that I could now do something different to what I've been doing in the past, something harder, more challenging, that is going to make me feel better about myself. It's going to improve my self-esteem. We will see later, when we get to the chapter on motivation, how important both of those two are. And the final one down there, when you finally leave a job, you can take all these skills and transfer them somewhere else. So that one is obviously very, very good from the individual's point of view, although it's not necessarily very good from the company's point of view. They spend all this time and money training you, and you get a lot of skills which makes you more employable. It makes it easier for you to get a job, and you say, thank you very much, and I'm now off to earn my living somewhere else. So one company pays for your training, and a different company gets all the benefits from it. But, to be honest, whenever you do any training, that's sort of the risk that you have to take. So we've got training and development, very, very important, both to the individual and to the company. Now, the process that we go through. The exam, even though it's a computer-based exam, process questions come up quite a lot. As I think I have mentioned earlier, you will get quite a few questions that in effect talk about what are the stages that you go through. They might well have these stages and they've mixed them up, and you have to put them back in the right order. So, training and development process. Training doesn't just happen. Somebody has to plan it and has to think about it. So let's make sure we're happy with the stages that we go through. So first of all, what are the training needs of the organisation? If you're working for an accounting firm, we've already said, you might get something like new international accounting standards, IASs, which will mean people need to be trained on them because the way that they prepare accounts has been changing. Similarly, if the tax rules change, then we will need to have some kind of training. Those kind of training needs are usually very, very easy to identify. Similarly, if we change the computer system that we have, very easy to identify that you need to train people how to use this computer system instead of the old one. The bit that's tricky would be where we're looking at things like, should we train people to be able to deal better with customers? Should we train people to be more innovative and come up with new ideas? How do we train people to perhaps be more efficient? So these aren't quite as obvious areas for training. So assess the training needs of the organisation. Does everybody need training in something, or is it only certain departments? Is it everybody in a particular department, or is it only certain individuals? So the training needs of the organisation, some things everybody needs training on, some things certain department needs training on, some things individuals need training on. So you need to work out what every single person in the organisation needs to be trained in. You need to decide what the objectives are going to be. So when you have carried out the training, what will people be able to do? Will they have an awareness of something? So you haven't trained them in any great detail, they just know about something in vague, in general terms. Will they be able to work faster after the training? Will they be able to work better after the training? So what exactly is the training supposed to do? Those two stages, very, very important, because without those two, we can't do the next stage. The next stage is to plan how the training will actually be carried out. Are we going to send people on a course that they have to go and attend away from the workplace? Are we going to send them on a course which is within the workplace? Are we going to train them as part of their job? In other words, sitting down at their desk, doing their normal job, and we do the training while they're carrying on with their normal work. How exactly are we going to do this? Are we going to talk to them? Are we going to give them a manual, so something written? Are we going to do both of those together? Are we going to do it individually? Are we going to put it in groups? How are we going to do these things? Now, when we talk about training, lots of students think that training basically starts with the fourth stage. The fourth stage there is to deliver the training. So, how are you going to be trained? Well, I'm just going to stand up and tell you how to do something. But it is very, very important that you've gone through the first three stages before you do the fourth one. Now, I'm sure that this has happened to you at some point when you've been working. In fact, it's almost certainly happened to you away from the workplace as well. You're trying to do something. You've got a job that you're doing, you've got a task you're doing. Somebody comes up to you, it could be a colleague, it could be a friend, it could be whatever, and says, can you show me how to do something? So can you show me how to do this? You're good at doing this, show me how it's done. And what lots of people will do at that point is they'll turn around, talk to the person who wants to know how to do something, show them how to do it. They'll simply start, they show them what to do, the person wanders off, and 20 minutes later they're coming back again saying, I didn't quite get that bit in the middle, I didn't quite understand what you did. Why do they come back again? The reason is because the training hasn't been very good, because we didn't really think what we were going to do. Now, what would be a much better idea would be somebody comes up to you and says, please show me how to do this. Don't say anything to them straight away. Simply say to them, I will go away for 5 minutes and I will think about what you actually need to know and what you need to be able to do when I finish the training and what's the best way of me doing it. Should I demonstrate it for you? Should I just simply tell you what to do? Should I work through it side by side so I do it as you do it and then you can copy me? Go away for 5 minutes, think about what the best way to do the training is going to be and then come back and show them. And if you do that second approach, yes, it takes longer, but the training will be better and the chances are that the person will understand what you were saying and they won't have to come back to you again. Now, that's what's very, very important with training. Companies spend millions and millions and millions of dollars a year training people, and a lot of that money is wasted because they haven't really thought, what's the training trying to achieve? What is the need? What does somebody actually need to do? Then, how's the best way to train them going to be done? Now, again, it could be wasting millions of dollars sending people on training courses that aren't very useful, but more likely it's the millions of dollars that is wasted inside companies by me showing you how to do something or explaining a task, and because I haven't thought about it very carefully, I don't actually do a very good job. So the next time that somebody comes up to you and says, can you show me how to do something, say yes, but give me a few minutes before I do, and then think about what you're going to do, and the training will be better. Now, all of those are important, and they lead up to delivering the training, so we actually train somebody what to do. But what is also useful is to evaluate what you've just done. So I have just trained you how to do something. I need to know if the training is useful, if it's good. If it is useful, I can do the same thing again. If it's not useful, I'll need to think of a different way of doing it. So the idea is, again, that we need to think what's the best way of doing something. Now, if we're going to evaluate training, evaluating training, as I've just said, simply means, was the training useful or not? How can I do this? how can I actually evaluate whether the training itself is useful? One possibility is to ask the people who've received the training whether they enjoyed it or not. The big problem with that is often the best training is stuff that they haven't actually necessarily enjoyed. If you ask people if they've enjoyed a course, that's not the same as it being useful. So asking people what they thought, the people who attend the course, is not necessarily the best way to do things. On the other hand, you could measure what trainees have actually learnt. You could, for example, give them a test. So, I don't care whether you enjoyed the training or not. Here is a test. If people do well, the training was good. If people didn't do so well, the training was not very good. That, of course, works very well if I can test whether the training has worked. So if, for example, it's a training where there's a lot of facts to remember, then I can test whether people remember those facts. If they do, the training was useful. Measuring changes in job behaviour after attending the training. So what I could look at there is, how did you deal with the customer before you went on the training? How did you deal with the customer when you returned from the training? If I feel that you have got better, you deal with customers in a better way, then presumably the training itself was quite useful. The fourth way of evaluating training is to think about its impact on the results of the organisation, things like its profit. If, for example, we have trained all of our workers to improve their customer service, and customers like that, we will get more customers. We will therefore get more profits. If we've trained our staff so they can do things more quickly, that will keep our costs down, and again, that will increase our profits. So, bottom line, if it's improved, the training was helpful. That's a very good way of measuring whether training is helping. The trouble is, it's actually very difficult to measure it in real life, because it might be difficult to say why profits have gone up. The training in customer service might only be one part of that. And finally, the impact of training on its value to the organisation. We send people on training courses. Do people view our organisation as being friendlier? Have we got a better reputation for looking after our customers? Have we got a better reputation for coming up with good ideas? So the values of the organisation, how do we look to the outside world? Has it improved that? All of those are ways of evaluating training. They all look at things in slightly different perspectives. Now, just as there are various kinds of training, there are also various types of development. And the various types of development that we are interested in at this stage are as follows. Management development. Develop management skills and experience. So the idea is, with management development, that I am trying to give you the skills so that you'll be a better manager in the future. So, for example, we were talking about recruitment earlier on, back in chapter 1. If I have to interview people, that is a skill. Now, I've never interviewed anybody, so if I have to interview somebody, I will probably do a very poor job of it. I'll actually end up recruiting and selecting the wrong person. So you could be sent on a development course, interviewing skills, how to ask the right questions, how to select the right candidate. So that would be development, because I'm going to be using something later on. Career development. Career development there is about perhaps getting skills for other parts of your organisations. And you can see the sort of things we have there, things like a secondment or a transfer. Transferring people to other parts of the organisation to see what those things do, to see what other departments do. Transfer somebody abroad for 2 years. When they come back, they will come back with lots of knowledge about the location that they have just been working in for a couple of years. What are customers like in that country? What are colleagues like in that country? Are there things they do different which are better than what we do? So they can come back with a different perspective. It's very useful in an organisation to have people who have worked in other places, in other parts of the organisation. Secondments are basically the same thing, but they tend to be shorter term. So you could be put on a secondment somewhere for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, so you get an idea of what somebody else does. Now, why are things like secondments and transfers important? Well, I would argue that they are good because it gives people a chance to see that the department they are in is not the only one that is important in the organisation. It's very easy in some companies to spend all your time working in one department, so you only ever think about that particular department. You never really see the company in the same way that the customer sees the company. So you're always getting fixated on what the marketing department does, or what the finance department does, or what production department does. All of these departments are just part of a larger organisation. So it's useful to be able to see how they all fit together. Now, I would suggest it's particularly useful for people in finance. When you are working as an accountant, one of the things that you will almost certainly do is you'll see how are the other departments performing. You'll be setting budgets for them. You'll be doing variances when they report at the end of each month. Now, surely, if you have done some work out in these other departments, you will understand more about the problems that they face and why perhaps the budget wasn't very realistic, or perhaps understanding why they have got these particular variances. As an example of that, my sister, this is my younger sister, she trained as an accountant, and she started working for the Electricity Board, which are based up in London. In fact, her office was about 300 metres from the head office of the ACCA. And so she joined what was then called the London Electricity Board. This was back in the days when the Electricity Board was owned by the government. So we're going back a few years. But my sister joined as a trainee accountant. I was off at university, and I came home after about 6 months being away, and I said to my sister, how is the job going? How is the finance department? You're an accountant, so how is the finance department? And my sister said to me, I have no idea what the finance department is like because I haven't actually been there yet. So she spent the first 6 months of her working life as an accountant basically not doing any accounting whatsoever. So I said to her, what kind of things have you been doing then? And she said, well, one of the things she did was she went to the places where they generate the electricity, the power stations, to see what actually happens, so that she could understand when she was talking about costs, the kind of things that they are spending the money on. And she did that for about 3 or 4 weeks. I seem to remember her saying to me she spent about a month working with the people who dig up the roads to lay all the cables. She spent another couple of weeks working with the people who check all the electricity lines to make sure that they can actually provide electricity to customers, and the people that have to fix those lines when something goes wrong. Now, the idea behind all of that was that when she finally went back to the finance department and she worked in the office, when she saw information about a particular department, or when she saw information about a particular cost, it wasn't just a number on a piece of paper. She would understand what the costs represented, and therefore be able to do a better job of interpreting what they meant. So it was 6 months where, to be honest, she didn't actually do anything about the job she was being paid to do. She didn't do any accounting at all. But she always said it was one of the most valuable things that she did, because she appreciated there were other people who were doing work that was just as important, and she could understand what that was. So career development, doing things like secondments and transfers to other departments. Very, very important for accountants that they appreciate the work that other parts of the organisation does. We've got professional development. Now, at the moment, what most of you are doing is actually professional development. A course like F1 in particular is probably not training, because for a lot of you, you don't actually need these things at the moment. You're probably not recruiting anybody. You probably don't interview anybody. You probably don't decide what training courses other people are going to be going on. So at the moment, this is a development thing so that you can think about skills you will need in the future. And you may think that once you have qualified and once you've got your ACCA qualification, that that's the end of your development. Unfortunately, it isn't. You will have to do what is called CPD, Continuing Professional Development. The ACCA will require you to continue going on courses. They may be technical courses like International Accounting Standard updates, tax updates. They might be courses such as recruiting, selection, etc. But the ACCA will require you to carry on always trying to develop your skills. So CPD is something that you'll have to do after you've qualified. The final ones that we've got here, we've got what's called personal development. And personal development simply means to improve your own competencies, to improve what you are good at. Things like doing development courses in report writing or time management or anything else which is going to improve you personally. So and personal development may not necessarily be related to the workplace. It could be something that you do on your own through looking at, self-help books, stuff like that, to develop yourself as a person. Companies are increasingly realising that if people are happier in themselves, if they're happier at home, then they often tend to be happier and more productive at work. So there are lots of different development courses that you might be attending. Remember, at the moment, you might just be interested in the kind of courses that you need to attend. At some point, you will be the person saying, here is somebody who works for me, you need to go on a development course for this, or you need to do on a training course for that. So at some point, when you are the boss, you need to decide what training and development the people working for you are going to require. As we've already said, in a way, training is easy to identify. Somebody's got a task to do and they can't do it. Train them how to do it. Development is a lot harder because there is no immediate need for it. We will see when we start talking about motivation in a few chapters' time that people respond to development courses. Training courses they accept because they feel I have to have this to do my jobs. But a lot of people like going on development courses because they can feel that they are progressing. And we will see when we talk about the ideas of a guy called Maslow later on in the course that that's a very powerful way to motivate people. Development courses are very good ways to get more out of your staff. Now, the final couple of bits and pieces that we've got in this chapter are basically models. So again, this is likely to be tested in one of two ways. Either the examiner will do something like, they'll give you 4 answers. They will say, for example, Honey and Mumford come up with 4 different learning styles, and one of them they will make up. One of them will be wrong. Or alternatively, they might say, here is a situation, here is a person, this is what the person is like, this is the way the person likes to learn about things, which one of Honey and Mumford's learning styles do they actually follow? So, Honey and Mumford, who I've now mentioned twice, Honey and Mumford come up with 4 different ways that people learn. Now, hopefully, as we go through this, you will recognise yourself as one of these 4. Most people, to be honest, have times when they are, when they perhaps do a different one. But most of us are happiest learning in one of these 4 ways. Although occasionally we will vary and learn maybe in 2 or 3 different ways at the same time. So the first of them that we've got is what Honey and Mumford refer to as an activist. Activists learn by doing things. So if I want to learn something, if I'm an activist, the best way for me to learn it is to have a go. I will probably get things wrong. Fine, as long as I learn why I'm getting things wrong so that I can improve them. Now, probably the best example of people being activists learning through doing would be something like driving a car. If you're learning to drive a car, really the only way to do it is to actually physically get in the car and drive it. You will make mistakes. Hopefully you won't crash, or at least you won't do it too often, but you will make mistakes. You will stall the car, you will perhaps clip a pavement when you're trying to do a turn, you'll get too close to somebody, you will perhaps not get out of somebody's way. There are lots of things that you might get slightly wrong, but the key thing is that you learn from the mistakes, you don't repeat them. So activists learn through doing. Reflectors would much rather watch somebody else and then copy things later on. So, for example, a reflector would be the kind of person who would sit in the passenger seat of a car and watch an experienced driver actually do something, and then they would try and replicate it themselves. So we have reflectors. Theorists, probably the most obvious one. A theorist wants to read the theory behind why something is going to work. So, if I was a theorist and I was learning to drive a car, I might read up about all the mechanics. How do the gears actually work? How does the engine actually work? How do things work underneath the bonnet inside the engine of the car? And once I understand that, I will be happier at actually doing the driving. And finally, pragmatists like to learn the theories, but they then like to apply them. So a theorist is quite happy just reading a book about something, whereas the pragmatist would then want to try and apply what those theories are. So they'd read about what the engine does, but then they'd want to sit in the car and see what happens to the car engine when they press various pedals, when they change gears, so they can see the things being applied. Now, obviously, in real life, probably there are more than those four learning styles, but Honey and Mumford were the first pair of writers, really, to start talking about how people learn. Now, there are a number of key things why Honey and Mumford is useful. First of all, which one of those are you closest to? Now, I am closest to being an activist. I find it easiest to learn by doing something. My wife, on the other hand, is much more of a reflector. She would rather watch somebody else doing something and then copy them. Now, we are both learning to play golf. I have to say that we are both very, very bad at it, but we are both learning. And when we go and have a lesson together, we both learn in completely different ways. So the last time we went to have a lesson, the instructor said, here are some golf balls, here is a golf club, I will show you how to do the swing, and then you have a go for yourself. So he showed us how to do the swing, and after about 5 minutes, I was quite happy hitting lots of golf balls. Some of them went a very long way, most of them didn't. But I could work out most of the time what I was doing wrong, and I would correct it. My wife, on the other hand, spent about another 20 minutes talking to the golf instructor and saying to him, can you just show me that again, and can you just show me that again? And it was about 30 minutes before she hit a golf ball at all. Now, I would have got very frustrated waiting for her, and she would have found me being very impatient, getting on and actually just hitting the golf balls, simply because we learn in different ways. Now, that's very, very important. If I am showing my wife how to do something, I need to show her in the way that she likes. So I will do something and show her how to do it, and then she can copy it. On the other hand, when she shows me how to do something, she basically lets me get on and do it, and then can tell me what I'm doing wrong, because we learn in different ways. Now, that's important if you are a manager training somebody else. There is no point whatsoever in training somebody in a way that they don't appreciate. So if you have somebody who is a theorist, then give them something to read about the theory first of all, and then a day or two later come back and show them how to do something. If they are an activist, let them do it and correct them when they get it wrong. If they're a reflector, do it for them and talk through what you are doing so they understand it. Now, whether you're doing it for somebody at work or whether you're doing it for somebody outside of work, a friend, a colleague, whatever, if you adopt the right learning style, they will learn more. Now, that also means if you're going to do a big training course, that you probably have to have lots of different ways of training people, because your audience, the students, some will be activists, some will be reflectors, some will be theorists, some will be pragmatists, and you've got to have something for everybody. Otherwise, there'll be groups of them that don't actually benefit from the course. So Honey and Mumford, a very, very, very useful model. And the final one that we've got in here, again, this one would probably be tested by having the 4 different areas that we've got of Kolb's experiential learning, which is coming up next. And the examiner would mix them all up, and you have to put them back in the right order. Kolb suggests that people learn from experience. The best example that I can use to illustrate the ideas of Kolb is babies. Babies and young children. Babies and young children learn by doing things. So they will experience something. Something will happen. They don't necessarily know why it's happening. All they know is that something has happened. So they have got cold. They have got hot. Something has happened to them. They've experienced it. They don't necessarily know why. So what they do is they see if it happens again. So a baby gets hot, and a baby notices that every time mum or dad puts more clothes on, they get warmer. So is that just a coincidence, or is that something that happens all of the time? Well, they observe it happening a few times and then come up with an abstract concept. Maybe the fact that I've got more clothes on is what's making me warm. It's a hypothesis. It's an idea. They can test that. So once they get a bit older and they can start putting their own clothes on, they can test whether that works. When I put my clothes on, do I get warmer? When I take some of my clothes off, do I cool back down again? They are now in a position where they can test those ideas. So they are now at a stage where they can see whether this thing works. Now, once they've done this, they probably then work out, well, actually, yes, I can experiment and I can try what happens if I put layers of clothing on and I can take layers of clothing off. They get more sophisticated. What they will probably then start working out is, does it matter which clothes they are? If I put a jacket on, I put one thing on. If I put a shirt on, I have also only put one thing on. So surely they should both be as warm as each other. And of course they will work out fairly quickly through experimentation that one of them is warmer than the other one. They then might start thinking, well, why is it warmer? Is it because it's thicker? Is it because it's a different material? And this is how often people learn. Now, I use children as an example, but it's how we all learn about everything. Imagine meeting somebody for the first time. You have no idea what they are like. Are they going to be friendly? Are they going to be rude? Are they intelligent? What do you know about them? You don't know anything. So you start trying things. You talk to them and you see what their replies are. You then start getting an idea in your mind of what this other person is like. You then start experimenting. If I say this, I wonder what their reply will be. And once you get to know somebody and you've known them for a while, you actually know roughly what their reaction is going to be to something. So you started out by knowing nothing about them, and you end up knowing a lot through experimentation. Based on my past experiences, when I said this to my wife, this is what she said to me. When I said that to my sister, this is what her response was. And you build up in your own mind a picture of what people's reactions are going to be. In other words, you've learnt about them. Now, whether you're talking about learning or whether you're talking about dealing with people as a manager, all the time we have to keep learning from experience. We try things, we get them wrong, we learn what was wrong about them, and we try something else to see if it will improve. So, Kolb and Honey and Mumford, they are theories. You don't need to know them in lots of great detail, but it's important that you understand what they are trying to talk about, because then if you get an exam question on either of them, rather than just learning the facts, you will also be able to apply them. So, training and development, a very, very big idea in lots of companies. As we started this chapter by saying, a lot of time and a lot of money is spent by companies training people. Some of it is wasted. A lot of time is spent by managers trying to train members of staff. A lot of that is wasted. A lot of time is spent by you showing other people how to do things, family, friends, colleagues, whatever, and a lot of that is wasted. If we can think carefully about how we're going to train somebody, then the results will be much better.